I think solar is at a place now where the cost curve where you're really kind of fighting a rising tide if you don't think solar is really part of the future.
Who is Shane? Shane Lebow is the CEO of PVComplete, and Shane has over 10 years of experience in the solar industry. He started his career working in project finance at Sun Edison and went to be the co-founder of a private equity firm 38 degrees north. He spent 4 years running a solar development company at New Columbia Solar, a CNI company based in Washington, D.C., and has a deep passion for distributed generation and renewable energy. In his spare time, Shane enjoys traveling, playing golf, and surfing. Shane holds a master's and bachelor's in Earth Systems from Stanford University. Please enjoy. Shane, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Peter, thanks so much for having me. I've been excited about this. It's really cool what you're building here. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. And for those of you who don't know you, maybe if you can give a quick introduction about yourself, who you are, what is the story of PVComplete, and we start from there.
Yeah, my name is Shane Lebow. I'm the CEO of PVComplete. We are a design and engineering software company for solar and storage. My background is all in solar development. I started my career working at Sun Edison, which at the time was the largest renewable energy company in the world, and then had a quite infamous bankruptcy and collapse. But ever since then, for the last 10 years, I've been working at various solar development companies, initially on the project finance and financing side, and then later on running a development team, and now working on the software space. So have seen a little bit of everything. And so, I think it's a really exciting time to be in solar. There's a lot of new stuff happening. There's some headwinds, but you take the good with the bad and keep on pushing forward.
Yeah, interesting. And I actually wanted to touch on a little bit on your experience. So you're not a typical guy who's in the solar design type of business. Normally, these guys are engineers, so you're more of a finance guy. How does that make you wear a different lens to look at things?
Yeah, to be honest, it's been a learning experience for me as well. I've worked for our customers, throughout my whole career, but never, I've seen the output of our software. I've seen a bunch of plan sets, I've seen a bunch of energy estimates and systems designs, but always from a perspective that I was one step away from the technical aspect. So I was like, taking a module count or taking an energy estimate, and then maybe having the file on hand, but never really digging into the details with it. So for me, it's been really fun to actually like learn how to do a CAD drawing, like even downloading AutoCAD and figuring out what that was. Yeah, it was kind of a new role for me, and it's been a challenge which I've liked, and I've learned a lot. So that's always exciting when you're in a position where you can learn and grow.
Makes sense, and I mean it's definitely not an easy task to do. I'm also speaking from my own experience. I'm also a sales guy by trade, not an engineer, and I was we actually met me working for a competitor. So it's quite a difficult kind of role play to put yourself in the shoes of your customer, right? So it's really, you think with your own head and you're trying to understand the problem with another perspective. And especially the engineers who are using a type of a CAD tool, it's really technical, it's quite difficult to use, and also the barrier of entry is quite high. How does PVComplete help these engineers tackle that?
Yeah. So yeah, PVComplete, we have 4 different products, 2 that are in the web space. So they're really focused on like kind of early stage design, pre-design work, helping to do initial layouts and proposals and energy estimates. But really, I'd say our focus is on our CAD software. So we have 2 products that are based in AutoCAD, one focused on distributed generation, rooftop projects, and then one on utility scale. And the real goal with that, and the reason why PVComplete was really founded, was to automate a number of these tedious manual steps that you go through when designing a solar project. As most people know in solar, your solar design is really kind of like the through line for your whole project development process. Whether you're a salesperson at a solar company or you're in finance, you're always referring back to that design. And so it's really important that you get that correct from the beginning. And the goal of our software is to be able to automate some of those more tedious steps in AutoCAD so that it's quick to go through those detailed designs. And instead of using, maybe a number of spreadsheets or reference tables when doing that design, it's all contained in our software. So, what might take, an engineer maybe 4 or 5 hours might take 30 minutes when using our automation.
Wow, so that's a big value add for definitely for using the type of designs that you do. Who would you say is your typical customer for both products?
Yeah. For our web-based products, our typical customer is mainly like a salesperson or maybe a project manager at a solar company. So someone who's trying to get like a really like initial sense of sizing of a property and like, maybe give an estimate to a customer. And then for our AutoCAD based products, that is really, engineering folks. So folks who are a bit more technical, and, are understanding all the nuts and bolts of it to execute on a project. And so it's a mix of like engineering firms, and then also like engineers that are at solar companies. It's interesting because we get a good mix of people who like are getting really deep into AutoCAD and like using it every single day, and then some people who never really use AutoCAD and wouldn't use AutoCAD if it wasn't for our software making it easier. So the goal is to try to make the product, accessible and accurate and helpful for both those types of users.
Wow, makes sense. And I fully understand and appreciate how complex it might be for a new engineer to pick up a CAD-based software. So it's definitely making their lives easier as well. And if you're talking about the CAD side of things, uh, can we unpack the mission of PVComplete? What is the mission vision and basically where you guys are coming from and where we are going in the future?
Yeah. PV Complete was founded originally to be, it's inherent in the name, a software platform that can provide a complete set of design solutions for solar. So, the reason why we have our web products and then we have our AutoCAD products is this idea that, hey, your design travels for the full life cycle of the solar project. So from cradle to grave, meaning that, to when you're in your first initial conversations about even the concept of a solar project, like, hey, there's a field over there. What can we do with that? You need some sort of software to be able to give that, first initial design. And that's where our web-based products, our PV Sketch product comes into hand. And then, as that project becomes more real, maybe you have a site owner that says, hey, we want to move forward. You have a permitting jurisdiction that is maybe solar friendly. The economics make sense. That design advances and gets more detailed. And that's when you move into the AutoCAD space because you're really trying to figure out exact and precise um, technical specifications for this live energy asset. And so the idea, the vision for PV Complete was, hey, we can use this software to be a through line for that solar company. We can be a form of communication for that salesperson who's starting the initial design, an MPV sketch, and maybe even that the construction person or the asset manager at the back end who is looking at the plan set, looking at the detailed drawings that come out of PVCAD. So, the future is to just integrate more and more into that process. So right now we've been really focused on the design and technical specifications, but one of the things that we're excited about is AI is just giving a whole new world of possibilities. And so, what we've been integrating AI into our platform over the last couple of months, and it really brings in cool things to ask the software now, be like, hey, I have this design, is this compliant with permitting codes in XYZ region? And, the software and like AI systems like aren't fully there to give you those precise details yet, but you can see a world where maybe 6 months or a year, you can have a AI agent that's giving you all the permitting codes for, a specific county in Alabama, right? And it just gives a whole level of interconnectedness for individual workflows for our users, but then also throughout the whole company.
Wow, so that's a huge step and also a huge unmet need as well. The paperwork side and the permitting is always a big pain in the butt for everybody. And What I also experienced in solar is that everybody's trying to move towards a more end-to-end workflow, which more or less nobody else is able to provide. And I think that this is a really good step forward in the right direction. Um, how do you see that? What is your experience with how different companies, different EPCs, different project developers operate? Because from my experience, there is no gold standard in the industry. Every company works a little bit differently, and every company has a little bit of a different touch and feel of how they approach a project. So what's your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like solar has been around what now for 20 years, right? Let's say, really like a big part of our energy sector, at least for the last 10. And the software for it is just really still far behind. The success stories and the bigger companies that you have seen have actually been in the design and engineering space, like the Auroras or the PV cases of the world that are a bit bigger. But there's a whole world of software that can help with like all these workflows at a solar company that really are starting to fill in now. But like, frankly, they're all like attacking one specific space, and there's a lack of interconnectedness. Where the reality that the challenge of developing solar project is that it touches so many different hands as it goes through its life cycle. And we've talked about that a little bit already, but just individual workflows, like, from a sales perspective or a real estate perspective or a legal perspective, like all these things require information and details that get lost a lot of times at solar companies. And it's why I think, everyone is familiar with the notorious term the solar coaster, but I think it's the fact that like these details are hard to track. And then you're also dealing with a changing regulatory space that gives you like this unique challenge in solar that makes it feel up and down a lot. And I think software can play a massive role in that by helping to give pertinent information to like the folks who actually need it. So rather than, hey, we're submitting for this permit. Okay, we worked 6 months on it. We submit for the permit, and then we find out, oh, we forgot to do like a wetland study. Now maybe software is like telling us that, like, hey, instead of like getting that feedback from the permitting office before you already did it, after you've done all this work, maybe we like can identify that earlier, in the process and get ahead of the challenges.
And I guess also AI could provide a kind of checklist or double checking from the get-go, right? That you're following at least your personal workflow and that you're ticking all the boxes along the way instead of, having to go back and start the design at the beginning again. So that's going to be very, very helpful for sure. Um, if a solar project goes wrong, what is the typical reason in your experience?
Uh, if the solar project goes wrong, I'm going to talk about more in like the development space, just because, there's a number of things that can go wrong in the operation space. But uh, in the development space, the big challenge is, right, like you're trying to build on schedule and on budget. And the interesting thing about the solar world is that sometimes the schedule is actually just as important as a budget, because a solar company has employees, and the way they pay for those employees is by getting the profit out of the project. And so if that project is now taking 2 years rather than 1 year, it's very hard to cover the salaries of those employees if it's just taking them longer. So most of the time when a solar project goes wrong, it's because either someone misses something or something changes about the project in that course of developing it, and you either have an increase in costs or increase in time, which correlates to really the same thing for a solar company. So the process of solar development is kind of working from like unknown unknowns to known knowns. So like you start off with a piece of land, you know, I don't know what I don't know, right? Like I don't know what this permitting jurisdiction requires. I don't know what's underneath the ground. I don't know what the price of these modules are or whatever it might be to build a solar project. And you're working down essentially like a big checklist of risks or challenges that you're trying to, mark off. And the biggest problems are when you put money into a project, you put a lot of team time into it, and somehow one of those unknown unknowns shows its head like right before you start construction. And so now you maybe, pay for the land or bought modules or did all these things, and you discover that the project is not buildable, or it's not buildable for several years, and that's like your disaster scenario, and that's why you see solar companies really struggling to expand, and you know, it's solar could
Yeah, I can really echo that, and I heard it multiple times on during the recording of this podcast as well. That if you look into the project side of things, the biggest problem is translating the real world into the digital world, right? So this is when the drone scans comes in as well, that you can work off a little bit, at least on the surface, but also you need to build your project kind of like a sandwich, right? You cannot put the ham underneath the bread because otherwise it's not going to progress naturally.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the fundamental challenge you have in solar is that, all the costs are capital costs, right? So you're not you're paying for everything up front, and a solar company is constantly trying to manage the fact that they have to pay for, company overhead and then the full cost of the project before they really ever get the profit from it. So they're relying on construction financing and debt providers and working capital solutions, and that just makes it harder to operate when you're having to put all this money forward before you actually know, before you have like any sort of return in hand.
Indeed, indeed, and also I think the last year was quite challenging, at least here in Europe. We've seen some numbers plummet, partially also due to the interest rates and the financing side of things as well. How was the perception in the US? How was last year for you guys?
Yeah. I think the US is still, at least last year, was still riding the high of like the Inflation Reduction Act, that it was a massive force within the US in solar development. The tax credit increasing. And then you've also had kind of the rise over the last year of battery storage that has taken a lot of projects that maybe uh, didn't work, or regulatory jurisdictions that you can figure out, and now because we're able to um, you know store uh, store power at a cheap rate, it is really kind of changed the nature of solar development. But yeah, certainly whenever like interest rates go up, that is a challenge for a capital intensive industry, and solar is no different from that. I think just in the U.S., you've had um, some regulatory drivers that have been really helpful, and now obviously with now the new Trump administration, that's maybe changing. I think everyone at this point is kind of working under the assumption that the Inflation Reduction Act will probably be rolled back to some degree, but no one really knows. So I think people are like proceeding with caution right now, and I wouldn't be surprised to see like a slowdown within solar in the U.S. So yeah, another big headwind in the U.S. as well have been California has been always like a bellwether state and a real big driver for solar. So I think it was in 2023, NEM 3.0 came around where California changed the rate at which it compensates residential and commercial properties for their power. And so that was a big headwind, at least on like the residential and commercial side within California.
Indeed, and also I think and I feel that the residential side of things is always a little bit more sensitive to regulation, and then the more you move up on the ladder, the bigger the project is, the more stable it gets in terms of outlooks, and if you are able to deliver the project a bit more profitably. Um, how do you see the development between the CNI and also the large scale segment of ground mounted projects?
Yeah, personally, like I've always had a real soft spot for CNI. I think it's this like beautiful challenge that it's like CNI is I think is kind of considered like the stepchild, or like the like looked down upon kind of segment within solar, and I've always felt that like kind of the opposite, just because CNI sits in the space where, hey, it's not as cookie cutter and it's not as standardized as residential, but it's also not as big as community solar or utility scale. So it's hard to justify the time spent to like customize to a specific project. But I've always thought that's a really interesting problem to figure out. Hey, how do we expand? How do we make CNI more efficient so that you can get through projects at a lower cost? But as far as like the solar, I would say outlook, community solar has been the name of the game in the U.S. at least, where a number of states now have legislation regulations that allow for essentially the economies of scale of utility scale, but then being able to sell that power for retail electricity rates. So the projects between the 2 to let's say 7 megawatt range that are ground mounted, that are maybe outside of population centers, so you have cheaper land, but still get to sell power for that retail rate that CNI and residential benefit from. Um, so that's kind of been, I think a big driver of solar in a lot of places. Utility scale is obviously still really big in the U.S., but what you have seen is that transmission capacity is filling up. You have like long queues within that, and so interconnection is increasingly a challenge. I think storage has helped with that because now, in places like Texas, where maybe electricity rates were going negative at certain times, you're able to balance out some of that supply. But yeah, it's I I still really am like always pulling for CNI and I'm always encouraged when I see folks trying to attack that space.
Hmm? I actually have some experience with that as well. I had some customers on the EPC and also the project developer side where, they were targeting larger portfolios of CNI projects. So, logistical centers or maybe a full school district where you can actually roll out multiple projects at a time within kind of one project, and of course increase the margins a little bit as well. And what actually struck me, what you mentioned, is that you are able to sell the electricity at the rate of retail. That's actually presenting a quite unique opportunity as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think uh yeah, the challenge obviously, where a lot of people have focus is like community solar, you're able to build at a lot cheaper costs and still be able to do that. So with ground mounted projects, but yeah, CNI, you definitely have that opportunity still where you're selling in, maybe at 13 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour versus what utility scale where you're selling to utilities at maybe 5 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So just a, a different, value dynamic. And then, also a lot of states have different incentives as well. But yeah, no, I think, honestly, a lot of the CNI growth to date has been from, bigger box retailers or whatever it might be saying, hey, like, let's hire a solar company to go out and do, 50 of our stores or 100 of our stores across the country. What I would be fascinated by, and I think anyone that's into sustainability or solar is like looks at a city and says like, hey, like a city like Los Angeles where I live, like why isn't solar on like every building, right? And like that's always a conundrum and the thing that I'm like maybe I'm an idealist about, but just seems cool. And the reason why that's challenging, obviously, is that buildings are different shapes and sizes, and then you have different counterparties that are owning those different buildings. So you have like maybe some credit issues or whatever it might be. But you think that there'd be some way of trying to streamline that or standardize it, like you've seen in the residential space.
It's not like you have a lack of sunshine in LA anyway, so it would make perfect sense.
That's terrible weather here all the time. Well,
But you actually mentioned something quite interesting. I read the other day that Amazon is actually the number one green energy consumer from a corporate side of things. And my personal expectation is that with the rise of the data centers and that need to feed the AI boom as well, they will need to consume more and more energy. What's your take on that? Or how do you see AI fitting into the puzzle, or from a kind of hardware side of things?
yeah, yeah. No, I think Amazon has been huge in solar. I mean, I even remember like some of the first solar projects I worked on in like 2014 that were for Amazon. And so they've always been investing in solar. And I think they just have like a lot of rooftop space, obviously with their warehouses. But specifically, I think everything is moving towards electrification. You have AI obviously, but then you also have EVs. And so, you're seeing just like the demand for electricity rising everywhere. And, I think data centers do provide like a really interesting opportunity because a lot of times you're developing those buildings in places that maybe like are less populated, maybe harder to get power to sometimes. And then also, with the price of batteries now, you can provide like a really consistent source of energy by putting solar on those big rooftops or maybe on, a piece of land next to it and then connecting a battery. And now all of a sudden you've taken away any sort of unreliability that you might have from the grid and given yourself like some stable operating costs for the next 20, 30 years because, hey, you know how much we're going to get for maybe, the AI or, the storage that you're providing there. And you now know how much you're paying for electricity because you've capitalized all that and you have your project operating now.
Makes perfect sense. And I mean, based on the latest data, by 2050, just to meet our current demand, we still need to grow solar by 1.9% annually. That's compounded. And just that's meeting today's demand. But to meet the demand that we will have in 2050, we actually need to grow by almost 5%. So it's still a long road to go, I think, to catch up with everything. Especially you mentioned EVs as well. Here in Europe, it's more or less impossible to buy a gas car, or it actually makes no financial sense because it's just so expensive, A, to buy and B, to run as well. And I think with this, you will connect more and more devices to the grid. So I think one step will feed the other, and it's going to be a full 360-degree flywheel of generating the electricity, maybe even storing in your battery. You can do a little bit of arbitrage on this. Tesla had the auto bidder software as well to discharge back to the grid. But I think it's super exciting looking forward. And from the people I've spoken to, everybody's expecting 2025 to be the year of the large scale battery packs.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Um, no, yeah, I'm here in the US, so I don't see that Europe as much, but I didn't realize that it makes sense that, everyone's turning to EVs. I mean, I think even the US, at one point, EVs maybe had, you know, some sort of perspective from people being like, why am I not using gas? Like, I want to have a gas car. And now I think with like all the auto manufacturers doing them and the people actually driving them, being like, wow, this is actually kind of nice. Like, or fast. They're fun to drive. But you drive an EV straight. I think I think that's only another driver for solar. I mean, I think in the US there's always been this like dichotomy, at least on the political right, about hey, like, natural gas or coal versus solar. And I think what people overlook is that it's not either or, it's like kind of everything, right? Like, I can it's like we have to meet an increase in demand, and whether or not solar is incentivized through government regulation or incentives right now. The truth is that like solar has quickly become the cheapest new cost of energy just because people are getting better at it. The equipment is becoming more readily available, and there is more supply of it. So
And speaking of equipment, let's touch on the elephant in the room. When we are talking about any type of hardware in solar, let that be the battery packs, the panels, the modules, China is always the big elephant in the room. What's your take on this? How do you see this progressing?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think at least in the U.S., like yesterday was kind of a wild day for everyone. Just our president deciding to unilaterally just make everyone enemies. I think everyone was expecting some sort of tariff regime. I don't really understand the perspective or the reason, but uh, yeah, I think I think it's definitely gonna hurt the solar space, which we're gonna have to figure out. There has been at least some, there has been, because of the Inflation Reduction Act over the last couple of years, a shift to more domestic content in the U.S. So the like some manufacturing capacity has increased. Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this chain reaction goes, because if the U.S. is starting to just bite everyone on trade, is that going to be a whole move for everyone to just increase tariffs wherever it might be, and try to put their guard up? So yeah, it's crazy times, and um, I think people are trying to, at least what folks I talk to are trying to buy up a lot of modules right now, to not only, I think, avoid maybe potential tariffs, but then uh, also to safe harbor for reductions in the tax credit in the U.S.
So everybody started to stockpile already.
Yeah, 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 well, we had in the U.S. we had that dynamic during the first Trump administration before the Inflation Reduction Act, where you saw the phasing out of the ITC and folks were safe harboring a lot. Um, And now we're seeing that again. I think the prevailing sentiment is that, hey, the Inflation Reduction Act will probably be repealed, or at least watered down, but it'll be kind of phased out. So people are saying, hey, if we think that um, we buy these modules now, they'll be able to be grandfathered into uh, the the existing tax credit regime.
Yeah, we've seen some of that in Europe as well. And, in the European Commission is also pushing quite a lot on European manufacturing. But I think, um, at least from the people I've spoken to, the US is still a little bit more ahead in terms of manufacturing anything hardware related compared to Europe. We have a couple of scaling projects where we have, small capacities being developed, but it's nowhere near to cover the whole demand without China. So that's a really tricky situation that both continents are in.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there has been like a pretty significant like manufacturing capacity like shifted away from China. Whether it's like in other Southeast Asian countries. And so it's not just China. I think, like, at least in the US, I think that there's a lot of modules coming from other parts of Asia. But, obviously now with tariffs, it's going to be a whole different game, because it just kind of turned out.
Yeah, indeed. So you can only pick a smaller tariff, not no tariff. So it's going to be quite interesting. One of my friends is actually quite active in India, and he was explaining me that India actually has this plan of, kind of following the footsteps of China in terms of making and manufacturing anything and everything. And they have some huge targets for solar. So they want to deploy something like 400 gigawatts of solar in the next few years, which will be quite interesting. But they are also trying to build their own manufacturing capacities domestically as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I mean, you look at the amount of solar that's being developed in China or has been developed over the last 10 years. Like, it's pretty wild how they've really been like a leader in renewable energy development. And I don't think maybe people realize just like how much is being developed there. But yeah, I didn't realize that about China or India, excuse me. Obviously a big population there, and yeah.
Big and motivated population. And just for the folks out there, I think it's really, just to frame it, when it comes to China, you really need to understand that China itself actually installs more solar than the rest of the world combined. So the data is quite shocking. I was putting the sales plan together last year, and I was doing a lot of digging. And when you see the numbers in China, that's really, how would I put it? Surprising is the right word, or scary?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think it's a good thing, right? Like, we'd much rather that than like new coal plants. I think the reality is that China just has such a big population and so much, like industry that they just build everything. So you have solar and you have wind, you have, you know, coal, natural gas, just to meet the rival demand for there.
Indeed, indeed. And if you had to make a bet, what what direction would you say solar will go in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think we will see when it comes to development, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I I think solar is at a place now where we're kind of on the other side of the cost curve where you're really kind of fighting a rising tide if you don't think solar is really part of the future. I think when I first joined the solar industry, it was called like alternative energy still, right? And I would tell someone I work in solar and they're like, they assume I was like a tree hugger or like, someone that was just like obsessed with the environment. And now, well, you see every major corporation, you see like every country having um, you know, solar development happening. And that's just because of, first of all, modules and equipment coming way down in price, but then also just the reliability of it. The fact is that once you get a solar project built, it kind of operates itself. You want to make sure you build it to spec. Maybe you wash the modules and obviously have to, maintain it to some degree, do preventative and maybe preventative maintenance, but it's not like, you're shoveling coal or or you're feeding new natural gas into a turbine. So obviously that's really appealing. And now that it's so much cheaper, I don't really see eh, I don't really see solar going away, even despite maybe these tariff headwinds or you know, IRA rollback or whatever it might be. I think we're at a place where solar's kind of has enough mass on the snowball and has a lot of momentum.
For sure, and I think in the next 5 10 years, if you look back to today, it's all going to be only a speed bump, and it's going to be much more simple to look at it. On at the other end of the hockey stick, right? And speaking of changing solar, how do you anticipate for the role of the solar manager or solar engineer to change?
Uh, I think a lot of this stuff is just becoming more integrated. Like I think when, uh, at least in the past, I think it was such that you maybe had to have experts in each part of the solar company, right? Like maybe you had to have a permitting expert or you had to have like an engineer or, and I think now we're getting to a place where because of software, maybe because of AI, you're now evolving in that, and there's more contractors out there that you're getting to a place where um, you don't have to have specializations throughout your company. You can rely on software to help you get through some of those more challenging places. So I think that's obviously a good thing for solar companies because it gives you more flexibility. And so I think, and I'm obviously biased here, but whether it's because you're able to benefit from like software like ours or other software, I think being a be, being a jack of all trades and understanding the basics of how a project gets through, what the economics are, is always incredibly important.
Do you think we will at some point be able to automate everything of the solar design process, or will we always need a kind of final checkpoint with a human at the end of the process?
Yeah, we've thought about that a bit. Like like I said, we're integrating AI right now, and it's like the AI system is allows you to like ask a bunch of questions about your design and be like, hey, am I doing this right? How should I do this better? Or tell me things that I'm missing. And that's incredible. But their next step is being like, okay, log into our software and just tell the AI to design the project for us. Like use our software to create a plan set. And that is definitely in the future, right? And so uh, I don't think it'll ever be full automation just because you have this physical component aspect of solar, where you still have a site and yeah, maybe you can get drone footage, maybe you can get like really specific radar and helps you, but I don't think you're ever going to be in like a fully automated, hey, like a human just clicks go situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I've spoken to many other PV design tools in the last couple of weeks, and the anticipation is that everybody expects their tool or some tools to be 90 to 95% automated, so that it will propose you like an ideal scenario of your project. But at the end of the day, you will still need to tweak it a little bit to match your specs, right? And before you start building.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing with solar is like every project is still its own snowflake. And whether that's because you're interconnecting into a grid that, there's less than perfect information on, or you're in a specific permitting jurisdiction, or you have a site owner with, you know, different sensitivities. And I, uh, I think that you're always going to need, um, I think you're always going to need like a good project manager and good developer to make sure the project gets done, um, in a like profitable way.
And if you could fix one major inefficiency in the solar design space, what would it be and why?
I, I, I think just, I would love to see, the solar design getting more integrated with the other processes at a solar company. I think you kind of have like two streams at a solar company where you have like, hey, maybe you have like, legal or economic components or financial components, and then you have like the technical side. And those things interact at different times within the process. But from a like software perspective, um, you don't see those things interacting as efficiently. It's kind of like someone pulling specific information out or taking specific information into the design. And so, I think one of our goals is to how do we make the design more integrated to the actual like commercial and business decisions that folks are making every day.
So making the whole process a little bit less siloed and more interconnected, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that's just generic software answer for me, but
Well, it is, but it still applies because I heard the same from many people in the last few weeks, months, and everybody is complaining about the same thing. We have one workflow that's really fragmented, and we need to have 6 different tools to be able to actually put the project up and be able to put it into operation. So I think it's definitely a valid point and a huge unmet need. Which actually triggered my next question. If you had one piece of advice to a young solar engineer, um, what would you advise them to stay ahead of the curve? Besides, of course, using PVComplete and being able to design in PVComplete.
a young solar engineer. I'm probably not gonna like I because I'm not an engineer myself. I'm probably not the best person to give advice to. Maybe a solar engineer, but I'll just say someone in solar, working in solar. I think the biggest advice I could give is try to find a way of seeing the bigger picture. I think like ultimately what drives a solar project and getting done, whether it is, hey, like how do we make money off of this? And I think it's easy to, like we talked about, to get siloed. And I think the more you can understand, hey, who's getting what, how's this happening, the better you're going to be able to make decisions in your specific responsibility set, whether you are an engineer, whether you're a project manager, whether you're a salesperson, that are in the best interest of the project. So, that the challenge a lot of times, if you're an engineer, it's like, hey, which modules are we using, right? And a lot of times that decision is not made from a technical perspective. It's made maybe from like a safe harbor perspective or from an economic perspective. And so like understanding how that all fits together is like always what I try to tell folks.
I think it also comes with experience, right? The more projects you build, the faster you learn, the better projects you will design.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, no, I think it's a really exciting time to get in the industry. There's the most smart people working in solar than ever before. and that's a really good thing. The amount of people that I've met that maybe were working in either some other software space or some other space completely and coming over to solar now is incredible. And that means that, you know, the, the world that we've come from in solar is just getting exposed to so many different perspectives. And you're going to see, I think, the efficiencies that maybe you've seen in other industries coming to solar over the next 5 years.
I guess that's the natural evolution of any industry, right? The more smart people you can get into, the more attractive it becomes, and kind of it feeds the flywheel as well. Um, if you had one wish or one ask to the audience, what would you ask them, both for yourself or PV Complete? What would you ask them that they should approach you with, or what do you need help with?
Oh man, one ask for the audience. uh, no, I I maybe ask myself this a lot too. So I think it's just a reminder. Like I think when you're working in solar, at least for me, like it it can be um sometimes a little bit isolating from the perspective that like you're not near the projects that you're working on a lot of times. You're like sitting in an office somewhere sitting behind a computer. And so um I I think just for anyone that's interested in solar or working in solar, just like go out and see a project. Go and like see like what you're working on whenever you can. I like my last role. I was working at a solar developer that was primarily focused on the city that I was living in, and just to be able to like walk outside and be like, oh, that's that solar project that I was like doing a design for, or I was like doing a legal contract for like a couple months ago, and seeing it actually get built. So like we're building real assets, real infrastructure, and making like a real impact. And so I just, maybe ask the audience to like check in with that every once in a while, because it's sometimes easy to get sucked into the emails and the numbers and all that jazz. And remember that this is coming out to being like cool things that are like cutting edge and new, and they're out in the world.
I can only echo that. Physical evidence really matters, when you're working for a software company and everything is kind of abstract before you actually see it. So in my previous role, we did a couple of site visits, and it's super interesting to see how the inverters are connected, how the modules are connected. Why is the ballast here like this? Why is the ballast here like that? It really makes it tangible, and for you and your mind to understand that you're actually doing a great thing, and there's something really touchable coming out at the other end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, one of the cool moments for me over the last couple weeks was I was talking to one of our customers, and uh, he was just telling us that how the electricians that they work with um, are like so appreciative of like the designs that they get from us, because they're like so much better than what they get from like other folks. And that was just like a interesting thing that I don't really ever think about. Maybe you know, a smaller electrical contractor in, I think this was in Michigan, that's building one of the projects that come out of our software. And that was just a cool tidbit for me to like be like picturing that project and thinking about like, hey, it's like people are actually really doing things with this thing I play around with on the computer.
Yeah, and I mean the general. I think the what's really missing in the industry, and the general rule of thumb should be, is people should talk to people. You know, because you mentioned before, everything is a bit siloed, and when you actually get on a call with somebody who's done a project like this, who has faced a similar issue to you, it really opens up new possibilities and new opportunities for collaboration as well. So I think it's super important for people to meet more. Now there is no COVID, so we can actually meet in person, attend the major trade shows like we did in Anaheim. So I think it's definitely really important to go and meet people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think solar in specific, it's easy. Yeah, like we've been talking about, it's easy to get siloed. You have your project, you have your checklist of things, and you have your timeline, and you're just always trying to, focus on that and get to that. And that can be isolating at times. And so, yeah, like get out to the trade shows and go and see some cool things. I every year I go to RE Plus now. I'm like always like blown away by how much bigger it gets, how many more people there are, and just like the different nooks and crannies that people are working in, which is super cool.
Very exciting. I can only attest to that. And Shane, I think we only have a couple of minutes left. My last question would be, where can people reach out to you? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah. Can shoot me an email at shane.lebow at pvcomplete.com, or find me on LinkedIn. Love to chat. Doors always open. Reach out to me. Obviously can tell you about our software, but more generally just like talking about solar. And here, really appreciate you taking the time and inviting me to do this. Obviously, meeting you at RE Plus, it's cool to see your journey in the industry, and best of luck with the platform. Really cool.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Shane. I really appreciate the support and also your knowledge, and I hope to see you soon in person.
All right, cool, man. Well, have a good rest of your day, and thanks for the time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.